Welcome to another deep dive with us. This time, we're tackling the Menendez brothers case. It's one of those stories that just grab you and won't let go.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, talk about a case that has it all right.
I mean, you've given me a ton of material to work with, so we're going deep.
Yeah.
Wealth, privilege, brutal violence,
Yeah.
shocking twist. Where do we even begin with this one?
Well, you have to kind of set the scene, right? We got to go back to 1989, Beverly Hills.
Okay.
We're talking the picture of the American dream, Jose and Kitty Menendez,
Right?
wealthy, prominent couple,
Uh-huh.
big mansion, right?
Yeah.
Two sons, Lyle and Eric. Jose, he's a successful entertainment executive. He even had a hand in creating Menudo, that boy band sensation. I mean, they had it all. They even had political ambitions.
So it seems like, from the outside at least, they really had it all.
Yeah, everything appeared, well, picture perfect,
Yeah.
at least from the outside.
But then obviously something went terribly wrong. Take us to the night of the murders.
August 20th, 1989.
Okay.
Jose and Kitty, they were just spending a quiet evening at home in their den, watching TV.
Right.
And that's when Lyle and Eric come in. And they're armed with shotguns, 12-gauge shotguns, loaded with buckshot. I mean, just think about that for a second.
Okay.
That right there, that choice of weapon and the ammo, I mean, that tells you something about their intent.
Yeah.
They just unleashed this barrage of gunfire, hit their parents multiple times. I mean, the crime scene, it was just horrific. You could just see the brutality of the attack, just in the state of the bodies.
It's chilling, really. Just even hearing those details, given the level of violence, it's no surprise that investigators, initially thought it was a mob hit.
Oh, yeah. Especially when you consider Jose's business dealings. I mean, there were rumors about connections to, some shady characters.
Yeah. So organized crime, plausible theory.
Oh, very plausible. Very plausible, especially early on in the investigation. But you know what? It was the brothers' behavior after the murders that really started to raise some eyebrows.
Really? Like what about their actions just didn't sit right with investigators?
Well, instead of, showing any signs of grief or mourning, Lyle and Eric went on this crazy spending spree.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Luxury cars, Rolex watches. They even got themselves a presidential suite at a fancy hotel. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Talk about ostentatious.
That's pretty unusual behavior for, grieving sons, right?
Yeah, it was a pretty stark contrast to, the image they were trying to portray.
Right. I mean, do you think was it a sign of guilt? Maybe, like maybe a subconscious attempt to just distance themselves from what happened,
Yeah.
start a new life.
It's a fascinating psychological aspect to consider, isn't it?
Yeah.
Were they feeling some kind of relief, or were they just desperately trying to create this facade of normalcy to, throw people off their scent? I mean, what happens when you suddenly have all this wealth, right?
Yeah.
Guilt, denial, it's all mixed up in there.
Right.
But you know what? It was that behavior, that spending, that put them right on the investigators' radar.
Okay. So their actions really, or rather their spending habits, just completely contradicted the image that they were trying to present.
Exactly.
What was the real turning point in the investigation that brought them down? What was it?
Well, the real bombshell came when they discovered audio recordings.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so Lyle and Eric had no idea, but they had actually confessed to the murders during therapy sessions.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they were seeing a psychologist, and it was all caught on tape.
I see.
So these tapes, well, they became the centerpiece of the case. I mean, it was, their own words. And of course, the media went crazy.
Oh, I bet. Makes you wonder what would possess them to confess like that on tape, right?
Right. I mean, was it some kind of a cry for help? Were they trying to, get it off their chest? Or was there something more calculated going on? Were they trying to, maybe set up a defense based on, psychological distress?
Right.
It's a tough question to answer, but one thing's for sure, those tapes blew the case wide open.
Yeah.
I bet
They changed everything.
those tapes were definitely a game changer. I mean, but they didn't just confess, right? They came up with a very specific defense, as I understand it.
Yeah, they did. Their whole defense hinged on the claim that that they killed their parents in self-defense.
Defense? Okay.
But it wasn't like, a simple "we feared for our lives in that moment" kind of thing.
Yeah.
They claimed it was like the culmination of years and years of intense abuse from their father.
So they're saying it wasn't just a one-time thing.
Exactly. Exactly.
It was like this pattern of abuse that built up and led to that night.
Right. Right.
What exactly did they say happened? What was their story? Well, they described a really, really disturbing childhood. They said that Jose had abused them for years. Sexually, physically, emotionally.
Wow.
They talked about being forced into sexual acts, being beaten, living in this constant state of fear and intimidation. They even claimed that Kitty, their mother, knew about it.
So they're saying that their own mother was complicit in this.
Mm.
Wow, that's a heavy accusation, not only against their father, but against their mother too.
It is, and it really raises questions about the dynamics within that family.
Right, right. Like the role of denial, the
Exactly.
power dynamics. How did the prosecution respond to all of this? What was their take on it?
They fought really hard to discredit their story. They basically said, look, these abuse allegations, it's all made up. It's just a desperate attempt to manipulate the jury and get away with murder.
Right.
Their whole angle was Lyle and Eric were motivated by greed.
Okay.
They wanted the inheritance. They wanted to be free of their father's control. Classic money over everything.
Yeah, yeah. It's a motive that's hard to ignore, right?
Exactly.
Did they have any evidence to back that up?
Well, their main thing was that spending spree after the murders.
Oh, right, right.
They said, look, they don't care about their parents. They're just focused on themselves.
Yeah.
And they also tried to poke holes in the brothers' stories,
Okay.
saying that their accounts of the abuse had changed over time, like they were making it up as they went along.
Right, right. It's interesting. It's like they're using the brothers' own actions against them,
Yeah,
saying that their behavior proves they're guilty.
right.
But the first trial ended in a hung jury, right?
It did, yeah.
So clearly some of the jurors, at least, were buying into the abuse allegations.
Mm.
Why wasn't that evidence allowed in the second trial?
That was a pretty controversial decision by the judge.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he decided to exclude the testimony about the abuse.
Wow.
Well, his reasoning was that it wasn't relevant to the legal definition of self-defense. Like, in his view, it didn't matter what happened in the past.
Oh, I see.
It was all about their state of mind in that exact moment when they pulled the trigger.
So he's saying, the judge is saying that the abuse, that history of abuse, doesn't matter.
Right. It's a really fine line he's drawing there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it does make you think about how the law deals with these really complicated cases involving trauma.
Yeah. I mean, how do you separate the long-term effects of abuse from the legal definition of self-defense?
Right, right. And how did that affect the outcome of the second trial?
Well, I mean, without that abuse testimony, without being able to tell that part of the story, their case was a lot weaker.
Oh, yeah.
The prosecution's story, greed, premeditation, that became the focus.
Right.
And ultimately, the jury found them guilty of first-degree murder.
Wow.
Life in prison without parole.
So even though the abuse allegations were so compelling, even though the first jury couldn't agree on a verdict, the legal system ultimately came down really hard on them.
Yeah, it did.
But then we have this whole other layer, right?
Yeah.
With Roy Rosello's testimony.
Yeah.
That really throws a wrench in things.
Yeah, it does. It does, because it kind of backs up what the brothers were saying.
Right. Remind me what was so important about what he said.
Well, he was a member of Menudo,
Right, right.
the band that Jose Menendez was involved with.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And he claimed that Jose abused him too, sexually abused him.
Wow. So even though this doesn't directly prove that Lyle and Eric were also abused, it definitely lends some credibility to their claims, right?
It really does. I mean, it suggests that maybe there was a lot more going on with Jose than people knew.
Yeah. And this new evidence, it's really reignited the debate around their conviction.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
What are some of the arguments that people are making for their release? Like, what are people saying?
Well, a lot of people are saying that this new evidence needs to be taken seriously, that their sentences need to be reconsidered, that the justice system got it wrong.
Because they didn't hear the whole story.
Exactly.
Like, the jury didn't have all the information.
They're saying that excluding the abuse testimony was a huge mistake.
Right.
That it painted an incomplete picture.
Yeah, yeah. So basically they're saying that the legal system was too focused on the act of murder itself. and didn't take into account the context, the history of abuse.
Exactly. Exactly. It's a really complicated issue,
Yeah.
trying to balance the severity of the crime with all the complexities of abuse and trauma.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What are some of the legal options? Like how can a case like this be revisited?
Well, there's a couple of ways.
Okay.
One is a clemency petition.
Okay.
That means appealing to the governor of California to either pardon them or shorten their sentence.
Right.
The other option is a habeas corpus petition, which basically argues that their imprisonment is unlawful because their constitutional rights were violated.
I see. I see.
Both of these are really tough legal battles.
Yeah.
But they do offer some hope to the people who believe that Lyle and Eric deserve another chance.
So the Menendez brothers case, it's not over, is it? It's still unfolding.
No, not at all. Not at all. It just keeps raising these important questions about abuse, about justice, about the lasting impact of trauma.
Yeah. It's a lot to think about. We've talked about the abuse allegations, and I just want to take a moment to turn to our listeners. Now that you've heard all of this, what are your thoughts? What are your feelings about this case?
Yeah, take a moment to really reflect on everything we've discussed.
Yeah.
How has your perspective changed as we've gone deeper into this story? What stands out to you the most?
We've really gone deep on this one, peeled back the layers from the wealth and privilege, the violence, all these conflicting stories. But the thing that I keep coming back to is how this case still resonates with people today. Decades later. It's almost like it's become this modern day Greek tragedy or something.
It really has. I mean, the Menendez brothers, this isn't just some sensational true crime story, right? It forces us to look at these really uncomfortable truths about abuse, especially within families, where everything seems so perfect on the surface. And it really challenges how we think about justice. I mean, how do you weigh the seriousness of a crime against the complexities of abuse and trauma?
Yeah. No, it's a case that definitely makes you think. And it's easy to get caught up in all the shocking details, but you're right, there's so much more to it. What kind of an impact do you think this case has had on the legal system, especially when it comes to other cases that involve abuse?
Oh, the Menendez brothers case was a real turning point. I mean, legally, it really sparked this important conversation about whether or not you could use evidence of an abuse in a trial. And about the need for experts to talk about the psychological impact of trauma.
Right.
I mean, before this, the legal system, it didn't really have a good way to deal with the nuances of abuse, This case, it forced everyone to kind of reevaluate things, and it led to some really important changes.
So it wasn't just about Lyle and Eric. It actually helped change how the justice system, how it deals with these kinds of cases.
Exactly. It's a pretty significant legacy.
And it feels like this case has had this huge cultural impact too, right? I mean, people are still fascinated by it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, think about it. We've got books, documentaries, even fictional stories, all inspired by Menendez brothers. And I think that says something about how we're drawn to true crime, especially stories that kind of blur the lines between victim and perpetrator. And we're also kind of obsessed with wealth and privilege, right? And those dark secrets that can be hiding underneath.
Yeah, yeah. It's a story that really makes you think about family, about morality, about what justice really means. And like we talked about earlier, the debate around the Menendez brothers, it's not over. I mean, you've got family members fighting for their release. You've got this new evidence. It feels like there's still more to come. What do you think about the possibility of them being released? Do you think would it be justice, to give them a second chance?
Oh, that's a tough one. That's a question that brings up a lot of strong feelings. I mean, some people, they really believe that the brothers have served their time, that they've shown remorse, that they've changed. And they point to the abuse that they went through, and they say that life in prison, that's too harsh, that it's not fair.
And what about the other side? What do they say?
Well, they say that letting